its broadcast and digital channels. And there's a lot to learn from other elite sporting codes like the AFL and like the NFL and others. And we'll touch on some of these today during this presentation. If we just maybe get into the presentations, Bruce. And I also, I'd like to also, please, in terms of sharing the information, we'll make sure that we're sharing everything together with you during the presentation today. All right, so some of the challenges and the industry opportunities, really, the first one is public welfare and sentiment. So we want to make sure that in the future, the concerns around, animal cruelty, and really, if we parallel this to human elite athletes, we want to make sure that these elite athletes are looked after, and that the social license to operate, the society and the younger people coming into the industry and as audience as well, really see the industry as something which is world leading, and there's some great opportunities to use technology to do that. Obviously, it needs to be underpinned, including all of the social welfare and technology initiatives, by increasing revenues and finding new opportunities to generate revenue to actually fund all of these new programs. We also want to make sure that challenges like integrity and what is really a multi-billion-dollar wagering business and broadcast rights business is supported through ensuring there's absolute integrity in all of the different platforms and processes in the industry, and also be able to give back to the community, be able to support the country racetracks, the country communities, the suburban and metropolitan areas. Or there are some really big communities around the supply chain, the farming industry, all of the related industries that this industry touches, that there's community support behind it. And we see some tremendous opportunities, growing the sport, being able to increase market share, really be able to compete with big brands like the AFL, the NFL, and other broadcast sports, elite sports, evolve the product, develop new products based on new data insights and new platform, and opportunities like augmented reality and virtual reality will present new ways of actually engaging with fans and change the way the sport's consumed, and really tap into some of these new platforms and really engage these global audiences. So there are quite a few challenges, but we also see tremendous opportunity through using technology. So really interested, introduce my colleague Bruce Cole, who we've worked really closely together over the last several years with a number of the regulators on implementing some of these programs. And really, Bruce, how do you see this evolving into the future?
Well, I think if I go to the next slide, I think the first thing to really consider here is that we're not just talking about transformation of individual parts of the industry. This is really an industry-wide transformation. And if we've had quite a lot of experience, as Evan said, over the last couple of years in working in various parts of this industry. If you take a bit of a step back and look at the different players in the industry, and in particular the role of the regulator, the regulator really is pivotal in the way this industry is moving forward. And if we consider the graphic we've got up in front of you on the left-hand side of that, that's the traditional role the regulator has played. It's about creating that race event, and you can view that race event as the product. So traditionally, the product has been the race day, the event that's held, and so the regulators had a significant role in obviously making sure that race event is held smoothly and with integrity. But really, they've been supporting the club network to make sure that the hosts of that race event are able to host those events and run smoothly. But there's much, much more to than just the clubs. There's clearly the whole ecosystem in the industry. There are all of the participants. So you've got the owners, the trainers, all the different people that involved from breeding right through the horses or the animal's life. So they are all really key to hosting this event, which as I said, in effect is the product. But the regulator also has a major role when it comes across the rest of the industry. So there's all the different suppliers in the industry. They all need to make sure that the industry is run in a way that's commercially viable and is supported. The regulator itself has its own staff that it needs to look after. There are key players within the regulator, such as the stewards, the vets, they're there to perform really specific roles. So all of these different entities and people can be supported in digital ways, and the way that they traditionally have worked is ripe for transformation. In our experience, there's a lot of very paper-based forms, there's a lot of process steps that can be revolutionised through a digital approach. But we actually see the whole role of the regulator changing quite significantly. And last year, year and a half or so with COVID, it's really driven this home, because you've had clubs have been still hosting events, but there's been no participants, there's been no audience or attendees going to those events. So in that case, the race is still run, but really it's driven home the fact that the product now in today's world is a digital product. It's being consumed digitally by the end customer who's consuming it on a digital device. And so there's this whole shift in the regulator environment towards promoting this digital product as opposed to the, if you like, the bricks and mortar type physical racetrack product. And that means having to have the right media partners, it means having the right media channels, and working with the WSPs, the wagering service providers, to give them the kind of data and the right information that then can be also provided to the end customer. And it's about having a focus on who is that end customer, understanding them. And it's actually, it's really critical, because that's where the revenues come from. And those revenues are what's going to support the industry going forward. So let's think about for a moment what that digital product is. And I think it's fair to say that across all of the sporting industries, end consumers, fans, they're all used to working in a digital consumption mode. They're very familiar with the different digital platforms. They watch their sports on phones or tablets or streaming. And so it's second nature to them. And we need to think about what the characteristics of that consumer actually is, or that customer actually is. Now, they tend to be people that want instant gratification. They want everything now. They want it 24/7. They want to be able to interact via these platforms with other people who are watching. They want to talk with their mates around which races they're watching, or who to bet on, or what tips, and be able to post that socially. So that whole social interaction has to be part of the product. It's also about taking that product, which is more than just a video feed of a race. It's about the data. It's about embellishing and providing additional information, analytics, all of this kind of overlaid information, histories that can be tapped into instantly via that digital product. So the regulator is increasingly putting a focus on what is this digital product, what do the end customers or punters actually want, and how can they provide that information. And that information, the provision of that, starts right back at the racetrack with the technology that's present at the racetrack. So it's a whole chain that needs to be reviewed. So if we think about the different focuses that are driving transformation, it's not one transformation for all. In the regulatory environment, there's different areas that are part of the focus of that regulator. So you've got, for example, wagering and racing, which is responsible for scheduling the races and running the events, in effect, the product. You've got media and content, which is capturing that product and then delivering it to the end consumer. You've got the club services and engagement, which is supporting that club network to make sure that it's run efficiently and viably, and also to foster that sense of community around that. You've got marketing and customer insight to understand who traditionally are, who in reality are the customers, and what are their needs and what are they looking for. Finance and operation is about your own, the regulator's own business environment, and making sure that that is really using the latest technologies, the latest approaches. And then you've got integrity and welfare, of course, and we understand that's to make sure that the races run well, and as Evan said, that there's that social license to continue to operate. So all of these are strategically important areas, and they're all ripe for transformation, but the drivers behind the transformation does differ. So, for example, if the intent is to try and drive revenue through the business and increase revenue, attract newer audiences, educate people around what the racing is actually about and get them to understand that and engage with that, then that driver manifests itself really through transformation of the wagering and racing part of the business to make sure that the product is what is wanted by the end consumer. It's about the transformation of the media and content to be able to partner with the right partners to get the streaming services out there, get the data out there. And it's about marketing and customer insights to make sure that you understand what the customer wants and you can evolve the product with that changing sentiment. Similarly, if you're looking at integrity and welfare, transformation to this part of the business is primarily about driving risk out of the business. It's about removing those vulnerable paper forms, those manual processes. And of course, the spin-off with that is that you're increasing operational efficiency by doing it. So by understanding the drivers across all these different areas, you can make the right investment decisions, the right prioritization, and indeed, form the right transformation roadmap. So let's understand what that transformation roadmap would look like. So going from left to right, the first step is really about getting your own shop in order. So from a regulatory viewpoint, it's making sure that the regulator has a full enterprise architecture, and so they have capability in place around things like CRM, around data warehousing, ERPs, etc. With that kind of foundation, you've got the building blocks then to move forward and start to look outside of the immediate regulatory business at the wider ecosystem and the wider industry and how to support that transformation. And so, as we mentioned before, trackside technology is really quite key as a starting point here. It's about having in place those technologies at the track that capture the data, because that data then becomes gold further down the track. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in the next slide, we'll talk about some of the trackside technologies. With those technologies in place, you can then feed that digital media channel. So you've got all of the wagering, the timing data that can be provided to the WSPs, and that then enhances their product.
I was just to interrupt, please. So if anyone has any questions during the session, also feel free to post them in our chat, and Nick, who's our question moderator, will collate those. And if you have some time at the end, we'll go through some of those questions, but also we'll address all of them and share that as content afterwards. So I encourage everyone, if you have any questions on the slides or anything.
Good point. To raise that. So the next step in that transformation roadmap is then to start to look at integrity, about maintaining the social license to operate, making sure that the horses are looked after and the races are run with integrity and correctly. So there are a number of ways that integrity processes can be tightened up and vulnerabilities removed. And we'll step through one of those in a moment. With good, solid integrity processes in place, digital integrity processes in place, you've got the added benefit, as I mentioned before, of driving efficiency through that part of the process. But also, one of the building blocks of that integrity process is the ability to track the animal. And whole of life tracking is really very important then for the next step, which is welfare. So welfare is all about transparency, knowing at any time what the status of an animal is and being able to share that with whoever the interested party is, be it the public or previous owner or whatever. So it's essentially an engagement piece. So welfare is engagement with the community and being transparent and being able to understand the status of the animal. So it's a very customer-centric part of the transformation roadmap because you're engaging with all of the public. And it's also a great opportunity to leverage that kind of engagement to provide education and information back into the community. And then finally, a healthy club ecosystem is really very important, and different ways that technology can support that club network. So we'll talk to all of these over the next couple of slides. With that whole transformation in place, then obviously the regulator and the industry is in a much better position to be able to leverage and innovate on technology to show leadership, just as some of the other sporting codes have shown leadership in this digital world, and clearly to then drive growth and monetization of the business going forward. So just looking now at the trackside and the technologies that are in place. And we've had quite a bit of experience with a number of these technologies. We've built a number of them into the systems and platforms that we've developed. But, you know, by no means is this sort of a closed technology area. It's constantly evolving. There are new innovations coming out all the time, and we'll also talk to some of those at the end of this presentation. So in terms of integrity, the types of technologies you see on track are things like microchip scanning, barcode scanning, ID card scanning, all of those sort of fundamental identification type of technologies. And when it comes to welfare, you can leverage some of those technologies like tracking. You can add things like geo-tracking to that. It's all about capturing where that animal is at any point in time and what the condition of that animal is. You can add to that, for example, medtech, the ability to track biometrics, etc. There is a number of different things we can also capture that will help us understand the welfare of the animal at any particular point in time. Race day operations, there are a whole plethora of processes. You talk to any of the stewards and they'll show you dozens of paper forms. For example, those forms can all be digitised, they can be automated. You can start to integrate with weight systems, measuring systems, with timing systems, ingest all of that data directly into the databases and avoid having to, prepare manual race reports and all of those sorts of processes. Club services, there's a whole lot of opportunity here to provide things like ticketing systems, marketing systems. It could be geo-marketing systems where you are in a proximity based and you get offers or access to different parts of the track, right through to commerce systems, etc. So there's a whole lot of technologies that can support the clubs, and we'll talk a bit about how they can be offered in a way that is maybe economically viable for those clubs who don't necessarily have a lot of cash to be able to invest in this kind of technology. And then finally, it's around the more innovative or blue sky technologies where we can ingest all sorts of data, and data is power. This could be drones, all sorts of things. So Evan will talk a bit about that at the end of the presentation. So let's just talk through one of the processes now, which I think is a really interesting one, and that is around, it's an integrity process around swabbing. Now, a lot of you would be familiar that in the elite athletes, it's not uncommon that they go through regular swabbing for substances, etc. In the racing industry, it's the same kind of concept. In order to maintain integrity, there's a need to swab animals to make sure that there's no drugs or any other sort of anomalies that are there that can be detected. So an automated or digital swabbing process like the one we developed starts right from the very early stage of nominating the animals to be swabbed. And this doesn't have to be a manual nomination. You can have analytics that raise the alert around an animal that is of interest due to, say, anomalies in its data history. And then they can be automatically identified for swabbing. Of course, the stewards can still come in and nominate particular animals to be tested. And also you can have business rules that says, if a horse comes a certain place, then it will automatically be nominated for testing as well.
I was just going to say that if anyone is interested in some more detail about this project, we have more detailed case studies and so forth on our website, which you can look at. And another really interesting thing you reminded me of, Bruce, was that we didn't target this, but the actual attraction to younger people coming into this industry was to have a mobile application instead of having lots of paper to fill out. So that was a really interesting
point of view.
Yeah, that's right. It was the employment attraction of having these sorts of technologies and being able to recruit that next generation into the industry was a really big benefit of implementing this particular.
Yeah, and it's a really good point. One of the things that we did through this project was ensure a mobile-first mindset. And I didn't mention in trackside technologies, of course, one of the biggest trackside technologies is mobile phones. Everyone has one. And that goes with tablets as well. So, for example, in this case, the horses that are nominated, they're available on a tablet, on a portal, so that stewards can at any time see which horses have been nominated and where they are in the swabbing process. So typically the vet would log on to that tablet that's in the vet station, and only vets who are scheduled to be on the racetrack on that day and authorised would be able to do that and see and access the process. And then they would go through, they would choose the next animal to be tested, bring it in, and then the identification process takes place. And that's typically microchip, with a fully automated microchip reading. You can have the brands and IDs available on the screen, for example, to help with that. And then the testing would take place, and similarly, the vials that are being tested would all be barcode scanned directly into the app, and all of that would be digitised and recorded at the vet station without any manual work needing to be done. If there should be any anomalies or need to, for example, if they've been identified as needing a blood test and it's not possible to do that, then, the application caters for the ability to change the testing with justification being recorded as well as to why there's a change or an anomaly or some issue that's blocking that test from happening. Once all of the tests are in at the end of the day, then the kit, of course, is closed up. The process of closing up is also digitally recorded, as are the barcodes of the overall kit. I should mention prior to that too, witnesses are clearly an important part of this process. So ID scanning, driver license scanning, photographic scanning can be done and is done of the witnesses. So all of that is recorded, and then all of that is retained for future reference if it's needed. And every transaction is geo-stamped, it's time-stamped, and it's stamped with the actors who are undertaking that transaction. So at the end of the day, the chain of custody kicks in, it gets handed over, and it's even possible to then track those samples using geo-tracking all the way back to the testing laboratory when it's handed over. So I think it's a really good example of how you can take what is essentially a paper-based process, completely transform that digitally and make huge advances in terms of closing off vulnerabilities and driving efficiency through that process.
That's been really well received.
Yeah, so it's in place. So we have that running with one of the regulators in Victoria, and the feedback we've had is that they love it. So it's been very well received.
I guess the next theme is, the really interesting one, which is the social license to operate theme.
So welfare, are very different. Before I talked about the different drivers changing the way you approach the transformation. Now, welfare it's a very different approach to what I just walked through with integrity, which is about digitally transforming a business process. Now, this is about engaging with the community. So what we did here with one of the regulators was we built a welfare portal, and that portal, you can go to that, you can navigate, you can log on. And the great thing about that is that by logging on to that portal, that regulator is starting to capture information and intelligence about those users and can then start to target them, market to them, or engage with them. But I think what's really important here is that traditionally the focus of welfare has been on the animal during its racing career, and we all know that is very much in the case of a horse. Typically, they can live 20+ years, so the majority of their life is outside of that racing career. And no animal will follow the same path. They all follow different paths as to what their future careers or ownership may be. They have different owners, potentially they change names, they'll move location, they may move interstate. So there's an incredible challenge here post-racing. How does the industry then continue to trace that horse in order to be able to have transparency at any point in time on demand around what the status and location of that animal is? And I think there's another interesting challenge here is that the regulatory environment doesn't enforce this tracking. So whatever approach is used, it's got to be one that's easy to use, that's fun to use, that incentivises people to go in and register and maintain a regular cadence around where that animal is and what's happening with it and how it's going. And also incentivises the public to go on and to interact and learn more and see more. So as I mentioned earlier, this portal it's a great opportunity to deliver awareness, educational programs, community listings, industry listings, all of that. It can be really a one-stop shop of everything around the fan for that particular racing code. So, as I said, we developed this capability. By all means, go and have a look at that and have a bit of a play and imagine what this could do to your state's environment if you were to roll this kind of capability out. So the next area is around the remaining race day operations, and there are plenty of those. And there's different ways we can deploy technology here. It could be in geo-tracking, it could be in providing geo-fencing around the racetrack so that when animals arrive with their trainers or their owners, then the check-in process is fully automated, the allocation process to stalls is fully automated. You're able to detect who is where on the racetrack, for example, through surveillance to make sure that only authorised people are actually interacting with the horses or the animals at any point in time. There's all sorts of interesting challenges being thrown up at the moment. COVID safe, how do we implement COVID safe around the track to make sure that people who are on site are ones who are authorised and fully vaccinated, for example. So these are really all good processes that can be transformed and applications of technology on the track. So the next slide is really then talking about the club network, and it's really important that we have a vibrant club network, one that is sustained and one that is fully supported. And as I sort of said earlier, it's a challenge for these clubs. They're not necessarily cashed up, they're not necessarily tech savvy, and yet they need to be on top of the technology. So there's a real role for the regulator here to offer services to those clubs and to support those clubs digitally using as-a-service type approaches where the cost of entry, the barriers to entry can be lowered to those clubs. So we're talking about things like ticketing systems, CRMs, marketing systems, delivering to those clubs bespoke media and content channels, providing various other operational support systems, business support systems. It could be payroll, HR, all those kinds of things as a service. And supporting them with revenue generation through marketing and sponsorship, for example. So there's plenty of opportunity for regulators to provide that kind of a capability. So what we'd like to do now is talk about some of the ways that the data itself can be leveraged. All of these process digitizations I've talked about, all of these technologies I've talked about, they're all there with a purpose of gathering the data that enables those processes, but also the data that can be leveraged to do all sorts of really quite fascinating things. So Evan, do you want to carry on and cover that part of it?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bruce. So I think what is really interesting is that we have now for some time, in computer science and I guess in technology development, we have faster chips, we have better cameras, we have, the onset of 5G mobile networks, the ability to actually transmit large amounts of data very, very quickly in between places. And if you bring all of these elements together and then try and reimagine a lot of these processes, which Bruce has been talking about across that supply chain, there are some really quite fascinating opportunities. So, I'm sure all of us are well aware with a smartphone being able to unlock itself with your identity being your face. Back in the recent past, when we used to all travel, coming back through the airport, scanning your passport, which then verifies yourself with your face. These are all technologies that have been deployed at scale for some time. And if we actually implement these and reimagine the industry, so we've got these things like microchips and well before that brands and other ways of marking animals. There are quite modern ways of actually achieving the same outcome, which is identity, and getting the identity of the elite athlete, the horse, the greyhound, the trainer, the witness. All of these different things these technologies are here today, and we're able to actually, we're doing some really interesting R&D around we're training an AI to actually understand patterns of horses and their markings to actually identify them as individuals. We've got some really, really great results with that. And I really see an opportunity to, for example, enhance broadcast, where you can actually, in the broadcast vision switch based on facial recognition or the identity of the horse, you won't need a human to actually pick that out anymore. Bruce talked about positional tracking. So, these effectively, if you look at an esports game, and I know esports and racing, there's a very quick kind of segue and overlap there. But if you look at esports, they run off geometry and getting timing information that's real time and fast. So if we have a track that is 5G enabled, that we're able to get this positional data, if we can make this data available to the app developers or an ecosystem of app developers where they can reimagine this data in new ways. If you couple that with things like augmented reality, with what Facebook are investing billions into, with virtual reality, augmented reality, you can really transform the fan experience. So it's really the combination of these different technologies which we see will allow a whole new range of products and opportunities to be developed. Biometrics are fantastic, and we're all, I think, used to, certainly myself, doing counting how many steps in lockdown I could do in the short radius around where I was. So looking at biometrics, we're quite used to them, but it'd be fascinating to see, and compare, for example, an elite human athlete's heart rate to a horse's or a dog's, and really watching, how are they during the race? Like, how's their heart rate tracking? And how are they going? There's a lot of these kind of capabilities that are here and now today with micro sensors that in time will find their way into saddles and into different ways of actually measuring what's happening during the race. So just, I guess, getting into this kind of bit of a node diagram. If we look at once we can capture all these bits of information, how do we reimagine these experiences? So from a fan perspective, we can actually understand, who is this person? What is their interaction? Are they someone who's interested? Are they a serious punter? Or are they a horse lover? Are they in a pony club? What is their engagement with the sport? And then in time, if you reimagine the club experience and the ability to actually attend these different events with this very detailed and segmented information, you can really personalize and customize that fan's experience of the sport based on who they are. You can give them a very relevant content. You can also reimagine and reorganize their race day or their event experience based on where they are and who they are. And I guess on the right-hand side, what we were looking at was, this hypothetical idea of, here's the Mildura Stakes, there's Little Beauty who's running, and on one side you can personalize the experience of the fan, but on the right-hand side, you can use that same data to really ensure that the integrity is protected. So we can correlate betting activity, and if there's an anomaly, we can see, what's the chain of custody, who actually touched the animal before and after the race, how was it transported, all of these different things that are captured as data and information, the check-in process, all of the identities of the people on the track, all these things can be correlated together. And I really see there's a double-sided element of benefit here. On one side, where you capture all this data, you can enhance the fan experience, and then on the integrity side and the technology development side, you can actually use the same data to ensure that the integrity of the sport is protected. So it's there's a lot of scope to actually go through that transformation process, but really enrich and build products well beyond what's imagined today. And I guess, really thinking into the future, I saw quite a few years ago now, but in an NFL game, there's a pop-up camera behind the kicker, which popped up. You could put on a headset, and you could actually go in behind the kicker who was punting for the goal. It was quite fantastic because you were given a shot or a view where you could literally look around the field inside your headset and be in a view that you could not see from anywhere else. And really, once you combine these different technologies, the 5G technology, the ability to actually transmit data really rapidly, being able to get these micro sensors and cameras all working together, you can imagine starting to really take the fan inside the sport, to understand the subtle vectors and changes of direction that jockeys have, you know, how they manage the heart rate and keeping the animal at a certain level, or how they increase the cadence, how they increase the speed or get the position around the particular bend, how it compared to a previous race. A lot of this information can be really used for enhancing the fan experience. So, and I guess, you know, the other part I've mentioned a lot about data collection, but a lot of this information as well is, you know, really ensuring that all this information is really well protected. Like, again, this is a very large and regulated industry, and we need to ensure that, you know, all of this data is secured, it's kept on shore. All of those data risks and protections are in place to ensure that this very valuable asset, being the data that's being captured and the fan data, is actually, you know, really well protected and shared. And there's a number of different elements that we can go through to do that. So I guess in summary, Bruce, that we see a tremendous opportunity to really transform the racing industry and really use these, you know, animals as elite athletes, you know, review them as we would a, you know, a Usain Bolt or some of the really, you know, high performing human athletes. We make sure that we have all the safeguards in place, and we use technology to really, you know, have them respected as what they truly are, elite athletes, and in turn make sure that the industry actually can transform itself to satisfy what the audiences of tomorrow are looking for. So I think, in summary, that we'd really like to continue this conversation with anyone. Those 5 kind of big themes that we see, we're going to be, you know, holding some more detailed sessions around those, and we welcome you to participate in those. And, you know, without getting into, I guess, too much of the kind of technical detail of how and what solution and so forth, we'd like to continue the conversation with this industry to make sure that we can extend a lot of these different themes and collaborate to develop some really new positive outcomes for both the athletes and the animals, but also the audiences and the fans in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you. So Nick, I see there's questions coming in. We've got some time now to have a bit of an interactive session and talk to some of those questions.
Yep. So we've got about 5 or 10 minutes to answer some of your questions. So first one is, it's good to hear that the horse racing industry in Australia is evolving and has started its digital transformation. Is this digital transformation a general trend around the world for the industry? If so, how does Australia compare to other nations? Are we playing catch up? Are we on par with the recent tech, or are we setting the trends?
I think it's a really good question. I think, as a bit of a general statement, the racing industry as a whole has been somewhat slow to get into the transformation compared to some of the other sports, which is interesting, given that there is actually a lot at stake in terms of revenues and prize monies here. What we've seen in the research we've done is that there are some countries which are looking at parts of a transformation, but it doesn't appear to be happening as sort of a holistic approach. It's a little bit piecemeal. And I think what I've seen here in the industry is that there is a willingness to transform, and in some cases the transformations, like the sampling process and the welfare that we've been working on, I think that it's fair to say they are actually quite globally groundbreaking.
I think, you know, looking over the last 24 months, you know, all industries have been forced through the last pandemic process to embrace technology. So I think it's accelerated a lot of these different investments that organisations and industries have had to make. And I think that in time, if you look at other industries, I think Australia leads the world, you know, in many agribusinesses. If you look at other industries that are agricultural based, we're seen as some of the leaders look in technology as well. I think, you know, for a really small nation, we punch well above our weight. You know, not to remind people that, you know, things like Google Maps, invented in Australia, There's many kind of world-leading technologies that, the seeds of them come out of Australia, but then the scale and the enormous markets are overseas and in other areas. However, what we really can do is be leaders, and I think the opportunity is we have really being separated in a long way from the rest of the world forces us to do a lot with a little. And given now the onset of cloud platforms and a lot of these commoditized computing platforms, we can really do world-leading things in Australia that in turn can be scaled and pushed into other regions. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
I think you're right. And I think to that point, if we get back to the notion that the product is a digital product, that product is distributed globally. So no longer are we talking about purely domestic market. And for us to compete globally with a compelling product, we have to transform. We have to. It's a given.
Great. Some other questions?
So thanks for that, guys. There's a couple questions on data. I might combine these two as they're on the same vein. A lot of discussion about data collection. What are the concerns are there around privacy protection? Who owns the data, and how do you ensure users' privacy is protected?
I think it's a good question. So one of the things that obviously has been established in the industry for the most part is that the database of record for the animals, at least, has been well established, and that's been contained within the industry, and a lot of the process automations, for example, are built on the back of those. So it's not like we're necessarily putting data offshore in cloud environments, but certainly when you start to think about how that will be moving forward, and when you start to build up databases around the customer record, for example, who the end customer is, they are very much concerns that need to be addressed. I guess this industry is no different to any other industry from that point of view. There's sovereignty requirements that you need to comply with.
Yeah, I think data protection is it exists in every single business, and so it's something that I guess as an organisation, our organisations looked at this very complex problem for very large regulated industries like the telecommunications industry, critical infrastructure. So I think there's some very good safeguards in place. But if you take it into the context of an individual user, we now we're spanning platforms like the social media platforms who have to manage very secure sets of data, but then overlay that with what might be required in a specific state to comply with the state's regulatory requirements. So I guess what we want to do is to make sure that obviously all of the protections are in place from a cybersecurity perspective. So, we talk about things like collecting data off a track. We want to make sure that all of these thousands of devices that will be connected to the internet will be secure, and there's certainly ways to do that. But in turn, all of the individuals' information, that there's a high degree of transparency with how their data is used, and giving them permission, giving the individual permission on choosing what parts of their information are shared, and giving them control over that. So I think that's an ongoing conversation. The Apples and Googles of the world are certainly involved in that, and something which we're well aware of, and we have this concept of trying to design privacy into the different platforms.
Yeah, and I think at that point we're fully aware that some of these processes are quite unique, in particular like in the integrity processes. The more data you have, the moment, for example, there is a sampling anomaly, then you've got to be able to access that data and suck it into case management systems and treat it with a high degree of security for investigative purposes. So there is that dimension to it also that is not trivial, and we've worked with the regulators around those processes.
Great, thanks guys. A couple more before we finish up. So what particular initiatives from worldwide experiences are really resonating with the public, and do they drive commercial results?
I think what we are seeing, and I'm sure those of you out there from the regulatory environment, the whole refocusing from a focus within the industry to a focus on the community and the public is one that is happening at a few different places around the world, and it's having that public engagement, and in particular around the welfare place. That's a huge shift that's happened in the last few years, and the investment that's happening within industries to ensure that welfare, traceability, transparency is maintained. That is happening in various jurisdictions around the world. I think the other thing that we've sort of alluded to here is, again, coming back to the concept of product, the whole transformation around the data that goes into the final product. So it's not just a video of a race event, there is all this other data that's associated with that, that is accessible via streaming channels and things like that. That is something that's happening in not just the racing code, but we're seeing in other codes around the world.
I'll talk about one of the more, there's some really unusual things that I've observed happening. I don't personally see how commercially viable they are, but there's certainly a lot of buzz and hype around it. But certainly I've seen things like NFTs have been used for, storing and creating.
Explain what that is.
So a non-fungible token is a derivative of blockchain technology. So, for example, it came out of the art world recently this year. People would there were things like the first tweet that was sent as a piece of digital technology was put into the blockchain. There's an NFT and an image created from it. People have started to do that with horses, so they'll take the DNA of a horse, and you'll have effectively what is your virtual horse that you can bid on. So there's a cryptocurrency transaction that's attached to the DNA of the horse, and you can breed these and race these. So it's a whole kind of virtual world and ecosystem growing out of that. I don't know how commercially viable some of those are. I don't know if it's hype of 2021 and a product of experiment and how much longevity that has, but there's a lot of activity in that area. I think the more tangible commercial prospect that I see really growing at the moment is using streaming channels, mobile streaming, enhanced broadcast, and really being able to rather than work through one broadcast channel, being able to provide micro, highly personalised and segmented race information and broadcast into other regions. I think that is something that's happened in other regions and certainly seems to be an opportunity. So,
and also, I guess the way that the industry engages with the end user, and I think if you look at, for example, All-Star Mile, where it's encouraged for the public to nominate horses and vote for horses that will actually participate in the race. Now, it's turning the whole kind of programming of the product of the event around and getting it back to the hands of the public. And it plays into that whole kind of interactivity thing that people are seeking.
I won't name the horse, but I remember in the first year's All-Star Mile, the public chose a horse that the experts thought would, what is the junior fourth grade person doing in the elite event, and that horse actually came third. So it was very interesting to see that the socially sourced information actually was potentially it questioned what the experts did in terms of weights and choosing fields and so forth. The other interesting statistic on that All-Star Mile, Bruce, is I remember the really big increase in female and younger participants in that program. So that was certainly something which was quite surprising to everyone when we opened up that ability for younger people and people in other regions to actually participate. Was that a new audience suddenly arrived, and I think that's something which is really important for keeping the sport healthy in the long term.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more. So adoption of AI has been mentioned quite a few times, and the tech does have limitless applications. However, could you please tell us about some use cases and scenarios where AI can solve real problems that the industry is facing?
Okay, great. So, look, I see, and again, it's early days, but with testing some of these AI technologies, but one that we're certainly looking at is being able to use facial recognition and all the markings on a horse for identity, and really being able to use that, whether that's through deploying that into different, the check-in process where the horse is checked in. At the moment, there are things like scanning microchips or checking brands, checking someone's ID is again, we're checking looking at something which effectively can be verified in real time through different data sources and APIs that are available. So the initial use of AI, of some of the use cases that we're looking at are for using machine vision to identify animals, being able to identify humans, provide that extra layer of protection around the integrity processes and sample collection and such, but also being able to, if you're looking over the fan side, being able to use this identity to feed that information back into broadcasts. So the first part would be, having a database which is trained, which can very, very rapidly, just through any smartphone or camera image, identify that animal very clearly, or if it is not that animal, then, create an alert to say, hey, this is not this particular animal. Having that deployed effectively controls and dramatically increases the integrity of the industry. But also, back to a slide Bruce was sharing a bit earlier, tracking the whole of life of an animal when it disappears from, a tier 1 or tier 2 or 3 racetrack and out into the broader world. Again, this technology can identify the animal. Some of the other immediate, I guess, use cases for AI are around recommendations. So, really understanding and recommending to fans, programs and events and experiences, that's more in the kind of marketing world. That technology has been around for some time and is fairly mature. The privacy protection around it is fairly robust at the moment. And then there's a bunch of new, areas that you can apply AI to, but you need to have the data to train the AI models. So it's a bit of a, again, bad pun, but carpet ball scenario, but we need to actually collect the data to train the AI models that in turn we can derive new insights from and generate new recommendations from.
Do we have time for any more, Nick, or how are we going?
I think we're out of time. Thanks for all the questions, guys. I did miss 2, but I will answer them and we'll get them back to you next week. If you do think of any other questions, I will be sending out a follow email to each one of you where you can submit them, or feel free to get in touch via our website at unico.com.au. I will also be sending out a recording of the webinar next week. Thanks for all attending, and we look forward to you joining us at the next seminar. Anything else, Evan and Bruce, just to add?
No, thank you.
I was going to say thank you for attending, and I guess, for those of you who don't know Unico, we're a 35-year-old Australian business, and actually our founder, Jeff, actually worked on trackside wagering technology, way back into the 80s, and that technology actually operated for, I think, 20 years. So there's a very long association and history in Unico with technology and racing. So we really look forward to continuing the conversation. We'll be having some more programs like this, and please feel free to reach out. But I guess Bruce and I are really interested in how we can collaborate to really take advantage of the opportunity with technology in the industry, but really raise racing up to the level of, the AFL, the NFL, and some of these others. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to the next session with everyone.
Thank you.